And welcome back to the Wellness Paradox podcast. I'm so grateful that you can join us on this journey towards greater human flourishing. As always, I'm your host, Michael Stack, an exercise physiologist by training and a health educator and a health entrepreneur by trade. And I'm fascinated by a phenomena I call the wellness paradox. This paradox, as I view it, is the trust, interaction, and communication gap that exists between fitness professionals and our medical community. This podcast is all about closing off that gap by disseminating the latest, most evidence-based, and most engaging information in the health sciences. And to do that in episode 118, we're joined by Lawrence Kosick. He's the co-founder of an organization called GetSetUp, and this is a online technology platform for the aging adult population. And this is going to be a very fascinating discussion around how we can engage a very underserved or in some cases not served at all marketplace in our industry. You've heard me talk about this many times before on the podcast, and Lawrence and GetSetUp's perspective on this is very interesting because they're engaging the aging adult population on a platform that some of them might have a natural aversion to, being technology platforms. So even though this is a conversation around technology and exercise in the aging adult population, I think there are so many valuable lessons to learn from what Lawrence talks about in terms of how he understood the needs of this market, understood the opportunity working with this market, and then understood how to collaborate with agencies, groups, and other organizations to really drive a business model that effectively delivered services to the aging adult population that they really desperately need, particularly when it comes to health, well-being, and fitness, as you'll hear Lawrence and I talk about in this discussion. Any information we'd like to share with you from today's episode can be found on the show notes page. That's by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 118. Please enjoy this conversation with Lawrence Kosick. Today, we're delighted to be joined by Lawrence Kosick. Lawrence, thank you so much for joining us.
Mike, it's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Very excited to have this conversation, particularly because of the population you work with, the aging adult population. We've talked about this population a lot on our podcast. I speak around the country to fitness professionals. In fact, very soon here, I'll be having a conversation with some fitness professionals about just this topic. So this is a great area to touch on. But before we get into GetSetUp, your organization, and what you do, just why don't you give us a little bit of an idea of your background to provide some context for the discussion?
That'd be great. I'd be happy to, Mike. So my name is Lawrence Kosick. I am one of three co-founders of a company called GetSetUp. And GetSetUp, it's a virtual platform for the education of older adults. And one of the most popular topics, as you could well imagine, is sort of health and wellness and fitness for our demographic, which is generally sort of the 50 and 60 plus. Mm-hmm. And this is a personal mission for me, as it is for my other two co-founders. I have an older father who has a voracious appetite for technology, for staying fit, for staying engaged. And it was the pandemic, I think, more than anything else, that made him and so many others have to struggle with, well, how do I get access to these types of services virtually? And it's not to say that health and fitness in particular should be sort of offline, online, and it can be a wonderful combo. But I think that we thought a lot about sort of our personal experiences with our family and the need for a place where folks could learn new things, socialize, stay connected with others, stay healthy, and what was a safe, secure place to do that online. And so that is the genesis of why we wanted to create GetSetUp.
I love it. And I think the pandemic caused so many people to kind of question, what we were doing, how we were doing it, why we were doing it, does it need to happen differently? And so it sounds like, and I want to dive a little bit more into GetSetUp. And this is kind of what I understood going into this discussion, but based upon your description, it sounds like this is partly, fitness and wellness, but it sounds like it's much more. So explain the the mission of the organization more broadly and maybe all the things you do?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So, as the name would suggest, Get Set Up, we actually started by trying to help sort of bridge that kind of digital divide for older adults. And some additional context that'd be helpful here. We actually started the business 3 months before the pandemic, so about 4 years ago. And nobody really expects a pandemic when they're starting a business, but suffice to say that it changed our trajectory because we suddenly had all of us now stuck at home having to think about how to access almost every service virtually. And nobody was more impacted than older adults.
Mm-hmm.
And so we scrambled from just teaching basic tech, which was, how to use your iPad, how to use your Android phone, your iPhone, your old laptop, update the operating system, the browser, whatever you needed to do to get into that sort of first Zoom class.
Mm-hmm.
But once you did, you became so interested in all of the other things that you want to do in your life. And so a very major concern and interest across our entire population was, well, how do I stay healthy at home? How do I eat healthy foods? How do I have my food potentially or groceries delivered, my medication delivered? How do I use telehealth? There was a very large health and wellness interest that caused us to think about programming and curriculum just beyond basic tech. And how many basic tech classes can you take before you'd like to sort of learn and do other things? And so that forced us to really, really think, well, what do we want our health and fitness offering to be, given that it's one of the most important categories for older adults, and they're now at home having to think about how to access these services. So if we can help them first solve the technical friction of getting from whatever device they have into their first video class, well, we've then opened up a whole new universe of anything and everything they can learn. So what are the health and fitness classes and programming that we can now offer to help them stay healthier at home during the pandemic, but now as a balance, they can go to the gym, do whatever it is they want to do to stay healthy, but have a balance or a backup being able to use virtual as something that's complementary if they can't make it to the gym, or they have another reason why they just need to be doing it at home. Perhaps it's mobility reasons, they don't have access to a car, etc. So having that flexibility of being able to access this type of programming virtually became quite important for our population. And it caused us to realize, well, listen, we're really going to have to think hard about what additional programming we continue to develop, given that this is one of the most important categories for older adults.
Yeah, I think what I find so fascinating with what you said goes back to the beginning of your story. Given that most exercise professionals tend to skew a little bit younger, I think sometimes we forget the barrier to just even basic technology and getting set up to the name of your company on basic technology. But my generation and younger generations don't think anything of, I've got a 10 and a 7-year-old nephew. I mean, at this point, I feel like they're almost going to be able to code by the time they're 12. But, my parents' generation and the generation older than that, technology isn't as ubiquitous for that generation. And it can be intimidating.
Oh, absolutely true. And one of the arguments that we had when we were thinking about the best way to launch the business was, who should teach the classes? And we thought, well, we could just go and hire subject matter experts, and they could be of any age, millennial or whatever, and they could teach the classes. And we thought, well, maybe there's a different way to approach the problem, because oftentimes there can be some fear and intimidation. I'll include myself in the mix here because I'm 56, so collective we. As we get older, we can sometimes have a little hesitation around sort of learning new things, particularly with tech, but across all the other categories as well. So what we did, Mike, is we actually reskilled and upskilled adults over 50, and we had them go through some training that we conducted, and then they became the guides and instructors on our platform. One of the interesting things there was, when you have somebody teaching somebody else with a similar patience, empathy, cadence, vocabulary, there's a magic that occurs because it sort of disarms the room or the environment. It becomes well, if that person can do it, maybe I can as well. And that really worked. There was a magic when we started doing peer-to-peer that just made that connection and created a comfort level to help with those sort of more intimidating topics.
Yeah, you said it. I think that's a brilliant strategic decision because that peer-to-peer conversation and somebody seeing that person that's just like them teaching the thing that they want to learn how to do is really powerful. I mean, we can get into all the motivational theories that exist around being able to watch somebody who's like you do the thing that you're looking to do. So that's a great strategic insight. And before we dive into maybe what you're doing from a fitness perspective with some of the people on your platform, I'd like to take a step back from that and just talk a little bit about some of the other things maybe you've learned on this journey in terms of your insights to working with the aging adult population with regard to health and wellness. So we'll get into the what more specifically in a second, but what have been some of the broad insights you've learned that maybe our audience could tap into?
Well, one of the first things, and it's going to seem obvious when I say it, but it's so amazing to us that more businesses and business categories don't realize this is the fastest growing portion of the population. So if you're trying to figure out where there's an opportunity to provide sort of health and wellness services to a market, you need not look any further than the older adult space because it's very underserved. And it is the biggest. And so thinking about, I think there's somewhere between 12 and 14,000 US adults age into Medicare every single day, which means they turn 65 every single day. And that number is only growing. We're simply not having babies at the rate that we used to. So that means it's an incredible opportunity. And if you think about it like that, it means it's a very large addressable market. It's very underserved and it needs a lot of help. But there's a lot of upside in helping this population because if you also look at the amount of money as a percentage of our GDP that goes into healthcare and keeping people healthy, it is a disproportionate percentage of the overall budget. So it's just good business, and it's the right thing to do. So that's point number one. Point number two is we come at things from a virtual first perspective, but that is simply because we wanted to fill a gap or fill a void. We in no way think that people should do all of their exercise and all of their health and wellness activities at or inside the home. It's just one component. If that is more convenient as a means of getting your exercise, and you can use virtual because of either mobility issues, you don't have access to a gym, a car, whatever the reason might be, we want to be there to help solve it. But otherwise, we want to help people find anything that will keep them healthy and active and engaged as they age. And so we think about it as a sort of an overall health picture. We don't think that you can be you can't be lonely and healthy. You can't be financially strained and healthy. You can't have major health conditions that go unaddressed and be healthy. It is all very much related to sort of an overall holistic thing. And I think we remind ourselves of that. And when we build curriculum, we try to have a balance and think about this as a whole market addressing a whole problem as opposed to one specific thing.
Yeah, I mean, those are both great learnings. The first thing you said, I mean, you're singing my song. That's something I've been banging the drum on for so long, is that the aging adult population, particularly in the commercial fitness industry, is either very underserved or in a lot of cases not served at all. And you don't need to look much further than most of the advertisements for your average commercial fitness facility. I would venture to say the average age is probably 50% or less of the Medicare age, people in their 20s and their 30s, not people in their 50s, 60s and beyond. And those people, to your point, they have the time, they have the disposable income, and they have the interest. So it just makes good business sense. And the important part here is it's also the right thing to do from just an overall public health and well-being perspective, because this is a part of our population that needs this care but isn't getting it.
Couldn't agree more. Exactly right. Exactly right. We agree.
So let's talk a little bit about kind of what you're doing from a fitness perspective and kind of what you're seeing and what you're learning there, more specifically to some of these classes and programs you're offering. And I really appreciate your perspective of, hey, this is an omni-channel approach. This is not virtual or the gym. It's virtual and the gym if you can do it. So what are the things you're learning in your virtual platforms with regard to fitness activities that you think would be beneficial for our audience to know about?
So this is a good question, Mike, and I'll rewind here a little bit. When we started the business, we would constantly look at the market, talk to our older friends, family, and loved ones. This is our way of doing market research, and try to find out what was important, and what they wanted and needed to learn, what they were struggling with that we might be able to help with, because the very first classes that we developed were just us guessing at what we thought the classes might be. There's a lot of technical classes, maybe some basic fitness, maybe some basic entertainment. But once we realized, well, why should we be making these assumptions on our own? If we have a community and we have users, why don't we ask them what they're struggling with, what their daily activities are, what those gaps may be, how we might be able to help solve them. And this is where we started to understand what kind of programming we needed to develop. And so even now, I think we get probably hundreds of suggestions on a daily basis of different sorts of classes and programming that we should offer. And we figured out a way to sort of take these ideas that are, sort of almost community sourced, and put them up on our website as class cards and have people sort of vote on those. And once we get 50 folks who say, yeah, this would be really interesting, notify me when this goes live, we're like, oh, that's significant interest. We should produce this class and push this one out in the next sort of 7 to 10 days. Now, when we looked at what those suggestions were comprised of, yes, there was a lot of early basic tech and a lot of sort of learning the most popular apps, but they were disproportionately health and wellness. And so they would be, help me cook healthy recipes at home. Where should I look to buy healthy groceries nearby? Where can I find discounts, deals, and coupons to maybe access those? How do I exercise at home if I don't have a gym near me? How do I use telehealth or an exercise app, or those different sorts of things? And it really started to build what I believe is now probably close to 35 or 40% of our overall classes and programming would probably be broadly in the health, wellness, and then in fitness category, right? Older adults thinking through what they need to be healthier at home, independent, longer. And so it really did build quite a large catalog, and it continues to be amongst our most popular category. Fitness is one of the few categories on our platform that's a daily activity. If you think about other things that you might want to learn, do you need to learn technology every day? Probably not. Once in a while when there's a specific use case, but it is not a daily activity like fitness is. And so fitness is quite unique in that it's something that we all need to think about and do each and every day. So that requires us to develop different programming more often and more frequently than our other categories around, tech and entertainment and other workforce development and whatnot.
I'd like to take a quick break from today's episode to tell you a little something about one of our sponsors. As all of you are well aware, addressing the wellness paradox is a lifelong passion project for me. And when you're going to go on a long journey, it's difficult to go it alone. You need to find like-minded individuals that are willing to go on that crusade with you. And that's exactly what I found at the MRF Institute. The team over at the MRF Institute creates educational content for fitness and wellness professionals who are serious about becoming a part of our healthcare continuum. Getting on the healthcare continuum is all about leveling up our skills to be looked at as that valued resource provider. The wellness paradox is certainly an avenue for you to do that, but we need many different levers to pull if we're going to get there. And the MRF Institute is definitely one of those levers. You can go to their website, mrfinstitute.org, to find all kinds of great, informative, free informational content. And if you choose to engage with any of their paid content, they've created a coupon code specifically for Wellness Paradox listeners. You can enter in WP 2022, that's WP, and then the number 2022 to the website at checkout to receive a 15% discount on your purchase. I highly recommend you go check out mrfinstitute.org. Now back to today's episode.
Yeah, I think it's a great point where you started, which is, try to not assume that you know what the market wants. I think when you start, you have to start somewhere. So that's a good place. But as soon as you could start to actually ask the people you're serving the things that they want and the things that they need, that's a much faster path to providing a valuable service.
Yes, I mean, I think that our approach has been test things. If you get them wrong, fix them fast. But usually the right answer comes from asking the community what it is they want and need to learn. Mm-hmm. And then when we realize what that is, then, finding the subject matter experts who can help sort of guide that programming. And then it really starts to sort of take shape, because then we can better understand, are we dealing with mobility issues? Are we dealing with time issues? Are we dealing with technical issues where folks might have the intent to exercise, but they struggle with, getting on their computer and turning on Zoom each and every day and following along. And so there's a whole host of different kind of friction points that we really watch, that we try to address along the way, to make this friendlier for folks over 60.
Yeah. So important. If being, frictionless, I think, with technologies is everyone's desire. I do want to talk a little bit about kind of some of the way you market and promote your service, but because I think that's instructive for our audience. But before we go there, I don't want to pass something that you said earlier, because I think it's such an important part of this discussion, and I think our space and the work that you do plays such a role. You mentioned loneliness earlier. And if anybody has heard the Surgeon General as of late, he seems to be on a podcast roadshow to talk about the epidemic of loneliness and what that's doing to our health and well-being as a country. And you mentioned that earlier. The senior population is certainly a group that is very much prone to loneliness because of all the circumstances of aging. So just touch on that a little bit, how you're addressing loneliness with what your group does, maybe some of the health implications of that, and then maybe what our audience should know.
Yeah, that's a really good point to double click on, because you can't be healthy if you're lonely, not truly, right? And so as we think about the progression of what GetSetUp might be able to solve, at least in part, if we can help people, first learn the basic tech they needed to learn. And in many cases, they already know it, so they can get into classes. But if they don't, we can get them there. Once we've gotten them there, because we think a lot about interactivity and engagement and socialization, it's caused us to sort of develop our programming and our curriculum such that it's not just one-way video. We certainly have on-demand videos, but we have a very large catalog of live and interactive classes. And so that means that the learners can ask questions, they can dialogue with each other, they can brainstorm together. And they'll do more of these in some classes than in others. Exercise oftentimes can have less conversation and be a little bit more follow along, but that depends on the subject matter and the size of the class. But because we think a lot about engagement and getting people to really participate, like our early milestones were, how do you get somebody into a class and then to turn on their camera potentially, or ask their first question, or connect with the teacher or somebody else in that class. And like, if we could solve some of those over time, and sometimes it took multiple classes to make that happen, because if you think about an older adult who's at home, who maybe doesn't have regular interaction with friends, family, or loved ones, because they just don't have them and they don't go outside, maybe perhaps because of mobility issues, like there's a bit of a barrier that we need to work to break down. But we can oftentimes do it over the course of a few different classes. But we know that magic happens when they ask their first question, or they fire their first emoji, or they turn on their camera. Like any one of those things means we've hit a milestone. And then we know that we're doing good work when we see them come back together, come back to classes with other people they met in a previous class. That's a wonderful thing too. And we know that if you're making a few friends in your first month on the platform and you come back and you're taking classes with them, at some level we've helped reduce loneliness just a little, right? Maybe a lot, but those are the sort of things that we look for that make us encouraged to kind of keep doing whatever it is needed to pull somebody into a class and into the participation and into more engagement.
Yeah, as you were explaining that, they make a friend, they come to class with friends. I can't help but think of the analogy to group exercise classes, in our field. I mean, I run a business where I am quite sure that some of the people that work with us only come in this facility because they come here with their friends. Like talking to their friends is the primary reason to come. Exercising is just kind of the bonus for coming. And so that socialization piece is so key.
And you're absolutely right. And you remind me to mention one other thing. The instructor is key. So we've noticed that the behavior, much in the same way that people might go take a Peloton class and like that particular instructor and then go take all of that instructor's different classes, that actually seems to happen with us as well. So my father, for example, he's now 94. He was 89 when we started this business. He's quite active. He exercises every day, but he's also interested in tech and travel and all of the other subjects. But he'll regularly say to me, I just took a blockchain class or a cryptocurrency class. I'm like, why, Dad? You're 94. Why are you curious about that? He goes, well, I took my first basic tech class from the teacher, the guide, Wade, and he does a lot of our sort of basic tech classes. And my dad really loved his style, his demeanor, his delivery, the types of people that went to that class. So he just signed up for every one of Wade's other classes, which also seemed to include, intermediate tech and then advanced tech. And so my dad was getting exposed to all of this interesting different content and programming because he was following the instructor, right? So for your audience, you'll find that also with older adults. The ones that really connect with you will really want to stay with you and learn and do whatever else you might also be teaching.
Yeah, so such a great point. And that is the relationship piece there as well. It's instead of peer to peer, it's peer to instructor, but it's still that connection. So you started a business, to your point, 4 months before the pandemic, which, very, very fortuitous timing for starting a virtual business like yours. But you broke into a new market in a new business. And obviously, that presents its challenges from a marketing and a customer acquisition standpoint. So just before we end, maybe teach our audience some of the lessons you learned in terms of how you marketed your services, acquired a market that you weren't working with because you were a startup business. I think a lot of people are listening to this say, great, I think working with the aged adult population would be a very worthwhile thing for me to do. How can I start to engage with them? What's effective ways to market to them? So what would be your perspective on that?
Yeah, that is a wonderful question. I think that um, we argue about that every day, which is what do we need to do to make our service, friendlier and more approachable for as many older adults as possible. And early on, we struggled with our business model because we realized that in our case, um, we were teaching basic tech to older adults. And oftentimes older adults are told, don't buy anything online, don't pull out your credit card, don't download things. And that can often be good advice. But what that also means is that you're going to have a struggle if you decide your business model is going to be, a monthly subscription done completely online by swiping a credit card,
Mm-hmm.
because that just doesn't really scale if you're helping somebody who's learning basic tech, isn't digitally native. That's not a natural transaction to make. It's changing over time, as we sort of educate people as to how to do that safely. But we had to decide, how were we going to scale a business that was friendly and approachable for older adults, that eventually allowed us to sort of back into a business, provide enough value to back into a business model. And so where we ended up is we were able to offer a lot of our classes either at no cost, or at no cost because they were subsidized with wonderful partnerships like we have with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, which is to say we were able to find organizations who cared about the health and wellness of older adults, and at no time more than the beginning of the pandemic. And they had available budget, assuming that we were teaching the appropriate health and wellness programming. And we were. So it was a wonderful fit. So we were able to help people at home who needed to learn almost every service virtually, but much of it health, wellness, and fitness. And that became a nice fit. So we were able to figure out, how do we reduce friction to get as many users into class as possible, but also find a natural sort of payer partner for the relationship. And so I'd encourage, folks that are entrepreneurs that are trying to think through, well, listen, how do I get started here? It's a very big market, but there are some natural friction points. And so think about the other organizations that already reach a lot of fitness folk, like the gyms, the YMCAs, the senior care facilities. They are all struggling with needing fitness experts, expertise, teachers, guides, and whatnot for group, for one-on-one sessions, and all things in between. And there's a pretty interesting opportunity there to go deeper and partner with those organizations, both for in-person, but also virtual, because we see them, asking us, well, how do we get more access to more teachers, more experts, more guides to do in person and online? We can't possibly fill all of that gap at GetSetUp, and we don't want to, but we think many of the folks that are listening here today could creatively help solve that problem and partner with those organizations, particularly senior care facilities that really, really struggle with how to help their older adults with this.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. I was talking with a colleague who works in the senior care space, and what he said to me is the worst spiral that they can have in their business is, when somebody falls, they go to the hospital and then they never come back. And one thing I know that we do very well in our field is we make people stronger, we improve their balance, we improve their proprioception, and we reduce fall risk. And so for those senior care facilities, as my friend who works in that space was telling me, the things that exercise professionals do are actually a retention mechanism for these businesses. And on the notion that it's always easier to keep your current customers than get new customers, the senior care facilities are very interested in keeping their residents healthy and independent enough to be in those spaces. And I don't see our professionals looking at that as viable of a market as some of the other things that we tend to really focus on in our field.
Yeah, great point. And it's a huge market. It's a huge market. So, and very underserved. So I think there is huge opportunity there for your listeners. to partner with those type of organizations. The other place, and you mentioned fall prevention, that is perhaps the single biggest problem that we can oftentimes help with and help with quickly. So that is a good place to focus. But you need to look no further than, the cost drivers for, Medicare, Medicaid, and Medicare Advantage, and see where those health plans are struggling to keep older adults, healthier, happier, and at home longer. And you'll very quickly discover, fall prevention, nutrition, management of chronic illness, a whole host of things that your audience is very skilled at and could help older adults with. But that is a good way to follow the data to see where there is demand, because these organizations, whether they be senior care or healthcare, their businesses, anything that can be done to sort of reduce the cost of care is something that they can't afford not to do. And then they need your help, and it is in their financial interest, and quite honestly, in the interest of just better care and the right thing to do, to engage folks like your audience to help solve these problems.
Yeah, man, I got to tell you that everything you just said there is a great separate podcast, because there's so much opportunity in the healthcare space. I mean, we're getting older, cost of care is going up, it's not going down. I think Medicare, at least based upon the data, is going to be insolvent by 2031. So I mean, there's all these, there's a great conversation around that, but I do not want to take us off on that tangent right now, because that's another episode. So Lawrence, before I let you go, you guys are doing a lot of great work. Where can people go to find out about the great work you're doing?
So please visit www.getsetup.com. You can also, all of the URLs work. So www.getsetup.io, getsetup.org. To make it easier for older adults, we made sure we had them all. But we also have a specific Michigan channel there for our Michigan older adults, which they'll be able to find and once they get there. But you'll be able to see a whole host of classes that are being offered every single day that are general interest, they're health and wellness. I think the audience here can sort of look at some of the health, wellness, and fitness classes to see what we think has been resonating with older adults, and that's maybe a clue for where folks could double down and think about ways that they could sort of offer that kind of programming, maybe in conjunction with a local organization or local senior care facility, etc. But feel free to visit our website, have a look at the programming and see what we're up to. And if you have an older friend, family, or loved one who might enjoy some of our classes, send them our way. And for the older adults of Michigan, the classes are free, offered at no cost, courtesy of the Department of Health and Human Services in Michigan.
That's great. Great partnership. We will link up to all that on the show notes page so everybody has access to it. Before I let you go, the last question is going to take us out of this discussion into the general premise of this podcast, which is, I consider the wellness paradox to be this trust, interaction, and communication gap that exists between exercise professionals and the medical community to some degree we were just talking about. As an outsider to our industry, if you could offer one piece of advice to exercise professionals on how they could bridge that gap, what would that one piece of advice be?
Well, what a great question. I mean, I think we as an organization have had to learn how to think about better communicating with the demographic we serve. So if you really do want to tap into the huge potential that I believe the older adult fitness market offers, you're going to want to start thinking about, if you haven't already, the style of communication. What does empathy, patience, cadence, vocabulary look like with this market, and how you talk to this market? And in many cases, if you are already looking after an older parent or friend or loved one, you have much of those skills that you can repurpose here, because I think that is where the magic occurs, is treating this audience a little differently. Again, collective we, myself included, Because if you service this audience in the way that it wants and needs to be serviced, there is a huge opportunity. It just requires us to think about the access points, the friction, the devices, the accessibility, all of which is addressable. But if you think about that, that is where the opportunity is in you being better and able to offer that to older adults in a way that most of the society today really doesn't do a specific job of differentiating. And my example of this is, it doesn't really matter whether we go buy a new set of headphones at Best Buy or open a bank account at Wells Fargo. We're almost always given a QR code or a website URL. So there's an expectation that everybody just knows how to access all of these things. Do not think that do not make that assumption for older adults. Think about everything from an accessibility first, and then you're approachable, you're welcoming, and that's what will make your business grow with this audience.
Very well said. Lawrence Kosick, thank you so much for joining us on the Wellness Paradox.
Mike, thanks for having me. A real pleasure to be here.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Lawrence as much as I did. If you found it insightful and informative, please share with your friends and colleagues. Those shares make a real difference for us. Any information we'd like to share with you from today's episode can be found on the show notes page. That's by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 118. Please be on the lookout for our next episode when it drops in 2 weeks. And don't forget to subscribe through your favorite podcast platform. Until we chat again next, please be well